She was invited to be humiliated by her ex-billionaire husband. He froze as she came to his wedding in a limo with triplets that looks like him. The music stopped the moment she stepped out of the limo. Crimson silk, diamond fire, and 3 little girls who looked exactly like the groom. 7 years ago, he'd thrown her into the rain, pregnant and penniless. Today, she walked into his wedding worth $2 billion. Every camera turned. Every guest froze. And the man who'd called her worthless forgot how to breathe. He invited his ex-wife to watch him marry someone else. He didn't know she was bringing his daughters. So when she said, "Hello, James. Meet your children," the world stopped to witness the most elegant revenge in history. This is a story you have been anticipating, but before we continue, let me know in the comment section where in this beautiful world you're watching from, and do not forget to like, share and subscribe to this amazing channel. Let's go. The courier arrived precisely at 9:12 a.m., dressed in a charcoal gray suit that matched the misty skyline of Manhattan behind him. His shoes gleamed like mirrors, his gloved hand carrying a single cream-colored envelope embossed with gold calligraphy. "Special delivery for Dr. Rosemary Chun," he said smoothly to the receptionist, who blinked, startled by the formality. Moments later, the elevator doors opened on the top floor of Chun Therapeutics, and the courier stepped into a world of glass and light, the kind of office that whispered quiet power. At the center of it, behind a polished mahogany desk, sat Dr. Rosemary Chun, founder and CEO. Her dark hair fell in a sleek wave over one shoulder, her white blouse crisp against her porcelain skin. At 35, she had the kind of beauty that came not from youth, but from survival. The courier cleared his throat. "Hand-delivered, ma'am. Personal correspondence." Rosemary's assistant, Elena Ruiz, stepped forward, brow furrowed. "There's no return address." Rosemary glanced up, her gaze calm but curious. "Leave it, Elena. I'll take a look." The door closed behind them, leaving only the soft hum of the city below. She turned the envelope over. Heavy paper stock. Custom seal. The handwriting, slanted, deliberate, was achingly familiar. Her breath caught. James Arnold. The name alone was a wound that had once nearly ended her. She broke the seal with one manicured finger, unfolded the invitation, and read, "Mr. James Arnold and Miss Victoria Ashford request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony at the Ocean View Estate, June 15th, 4 p.m. And then, below the elegant typography, a small handwritten note in the same sharp script that once signed her divorce papers. "Rosemary, I thought you might enjoy witnessing what real success looks like. Perhaps it will inspire you to finally make something of yourself. Do try to dress appropriately. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself in front of people who matter. Ja." For a long moment, there was no sound in the office except the low ticking of the antique clock on her wall. Then Rosemary laughed. Softly. Coldly. It wasn't the bitter laugh of the woman she once was. It was the quiet amusement of someone who'd outgrown her pain. She set the invitation on her desk, smoothing it flat with steady fingers. "Of course it's him," she murmured. "But ghosts never arrive empty-handed." The sight of his name dragged her back, to the penthouse overlooking the Hudson, to marble floors and cold arguments dressed in silk. She could still see it. That night. 7 years ago. The rain had been falling in silver sheets against the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd made his favorite dinner, Chilean sea bass with ginger sauce, and waited for him to come home. The pregnancy test trembled in her hand, 2 unmistakable pink lines glowing beneath the bathroom light. She'd been 3 months along. When the door finally opened, James stepped in, already irritated. His tie was loose, his hair slightly damp. "James," she'd said, breathless with excitement. "I have something to tell you." He didn't look at her. "Make it quick. I've had a long day." She smiled nervously. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, fragile and hopeful. He froze, not with joy, but disbelief. Then his mouth twisted into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Pregnant." He repeated it like a curse. "And I suppose I meant to believe it's mine." Her world tilted. "Of course it's yours. James, I would never." He cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Please. You've been hinting about a family since the day we married. I should have seen it coming. The trap. The desperation." Tears welled in her eyes. You think this was planned? I think, he said, loosening his cufflinks, that I made the biggest mistake of my life marrying a woman who came to me with nothing and expected me to build her into something. He walked past her toward the bar, poured himself a drink, and said over his shoulder, "You're a pretty experiment, Rosemary. But like most experiments, you failed." And then the final blow. "I'll have the lawyers send papers in the morning. You'll be out by noon." She remembered the taste of salt. From her tears or the rain, she couldn't tell. Remembered standing on the sidewalk, soaked, clutching the tiny plastic test that had once meant happiness. That was the night everything in her shattered. And the night something else began to form, the steel beneath her skin. In the weeks that followed, Rosemary had nothing but her degrees, her grandmother's old notebooks on traditional Chinese medicine, and the faint, fluttering life inside her. When the hospital nurse placed 3 newborn girls in her arms 6 months later, she'd felt both awe and terror. Triplets. Mara, Clara, and Cinderella, each one with James's unmistakable eyes. She'd promised them then, through exhaustion and tears, "You will never need a man who cannot see your worth." And she meant it. For years she worked while they slept, in labs, in borrowed kitchens, in a basement that smelled of disinfectant and dreams. She mixed herbs and formulas, studied compounds, tested serums. Her breakthrough came on a night when the girls were 2 years old, a molecular fusion that regenerated skin tissue faster than any existing product. She patented it quietly, funded it herself, and began what would become Chen Therapeutics. 7 years later, that small lab had grown into a global empire. Her daughters attended the prestigious Ashford Academy, the same name that appeared on the wedding invitation, the Ashford family's elite school. Life, she thought, had a sense of irony. Elena knocked lightly before stepping into the office again. "Dr. Chen? You've been quiet for 10 minutes. Should I?" Rosemary held up the invitation. "You ever notice how some people mistake cruelty for power?" Elena frowned. "That handwriting looks expensive and stupid. What is it?" "My ex-husband's wedding invitation," Rosemary said, her tone smooth as silk. Elena blinked. "He invited you?" "With a personal note. Very classy. What does he want?" "Validation," Rosemary said simply. "The kind only the humiliated can give." Elena crossed her arms. "So, you're not going?" Rosemary smiled, the kind of slow, deliberate smile that meant something was already in motion. "Oh, I'm going," she said. "But not alone." She reached for the framed photo on her desk, 3 laughing girls in matching school uniforms. "My daughters and I have a wedding to attend." That evening, the penthouse lights of Chin Tower glowed against the skyline. Rosemary stood on the balcony, a glass of red wine in her hand, the city stretching endlessly below. The girls were asleep upstairs after piano practice and bedtime stories. Mara dreamed of numbers, Clara of words, and Cinderella of music. Each brilliant, each beautiful, each a reflection of the man who'd tried to erase them. She thought about him, James Arnold, real estate magnate, Forbes' darling, and soon-to-be husband of Victoria Ashford, daughter of an old money dynasty. He'd built his empire on charm and ruthlessness. But he hadn't built her. He didn't know she was now wealthier than he had ever been. Didn't know that his new in-laws company depended on her research. Didn't know that the nothing he discarded had turned into a force that made CEOs tremble. She swirled the wine in her glass, the deep red liquid catching the light. "Do try to dress appropriately," his note had said. "Oh, James," she whispered to the night, "I intend to." Sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows. The girls' laughter echoed down the hallway. "Mama, look." Mara waved her school tablet. "My science project got top marks again." "Excellent," Rosemary said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "You're just like your grandmother, brilliant and curious." Clara tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, are we going somewhere fancy soon? Elena said you told her to call the stylists." Cinderella added, "Is it another charity ball? Can we wear matching dresses again?" Rosemary smiled. "Something like that. But this one's very special." She looked at them, 3 pairs of identical eyes that mirrored the man who had once called her worthless. In that moment, she felt not pain, but power. She crouched down so she could look at them eye to eye. "Girls," she said softly, "sometimes, people will try to make you feel small. The best answer is not anger. It's to rise so high they can't reach you. The triplets nodded, solemn as tiny queens in training. Now, Rosemary said, standing, her tone bright again, finish breakfast. We have a fitting at noon. By mid-morning, her office buzzed with quiet anticipation. Word had already spread that Dr. Chun was planning a personal appearance at a major social event. Her stylists were booked. A custom couture gown was being flown in from Paris. The car service had been reserved, not a limousine, but a stretched Rolls-Royce Phantom. Elena peeked into her office, whispering, "You're really doing this?" "Of course," Rosemary said. "He wanted an audience. I'll give him one." Elena grinned. "You're terrifying. In a beautiful way." Rosemary's eyes softened. "No, Elena. Just precise." She picked up the invitation one last time. The gold lettering gleamed beneath the morning light. "June 15th, she murmured. "He'll regret every word he wrote." Then she tore the note in half, not the invitation, but the message he'd written by hand. The cruel words fluttered into her trash bin like ashes. That night, Rosemary wrote a short letter in her private journal, a ritual she'd begun the day she founded Chun Therapeutics. She wrote not to remember, but to measure how far she'd come. 7 years ago, I stood in the rain, discarded, with 3 lives inside me and nothing in my hands. Today, I hold empires. I hold laughter. I hold peace. The past doesn't haunt me anymore, it serves me. He wants to show me success. I'll show him transformation. She closed the journal, placed it in her drawer, and turned off the lamp. From the next room, she heard soft giggles, her daughters whispering under the covers when they should have been asleep. "Mama," a small voice called. "Yes, darling." "Will Daddy be nice when he sees us?" Rosemary hesitated for a heartbeat, then smiled gently. "He'll be speechless, my love." She crossed to the window, the city glittering below like a field of stars. The skyline reflected in her eyes, hard, bright, unyielding. Some invitations are meant to shame you. Some become the stage for your victory. Rosemary Chun had just accepted hers. The city glittered that evening like 1,000 promises she still believed in. From the penthouse balcony, the Hudson shimmered with the gold reflections of skyscrapers, and somewhere below, taxis hummed like electric bees. Inside, Rosemary Chun moved through the quiet apartment with a kind of reverent excitement. It had taken her 3 tries to get the candles just right, not too romantic, not too dim. A bottle of Bordeaux breathed on the table beside 2 plates of sea bass and sautéed greens. The faint scent of jasmine rose from the diffuser by the piano. Everything was perfect. Her hands trembled as she held the small white box, the baby shoes she'd bought that afternoon. They were impossibly tiny, made of soft leather, tied with satin ribbons. She imagined James's face when he saw them. The way his stern features would break into that rare boyish smile she'd fallen in love with. 7 years ago, he'd swept her out of graduate school and into a world of glass towers and gala dinners. He'd been brilliant, confident, ruthless in business, but gentle with her. Or at least, he used to be. Somewhere along the way, the warmth had cooled into calculation. Still, she believed the man she'd married was buried somewhere under the armor. She smoothed the silk of her dress and glanced at the clock. 8:37 p.m. He was late again. She told herself he was probably finishing a meeting. The rain started softly against the windows, a curtain of silver drops. When the elevator chimed, her heart leapt. She rushed to the door, the pregnancy test hidden behind her back. James stepped in, tall and immaculate in a navy suit that looked freshly tailored. But his tie hung loose, and the smell of whiskey lingered faintly on his breath. "You're home," she said brightly, moving toward him. "I have something." He brushed past her without meeting her eyes, tossing his keys onto the marble counter. "Why are there candles?" "I wanted to have dinner together. I made your favorite. And there's something I need to tell you." He loosened his cufflinks, sighing. "If it's about the charity gala, tell Elena to handle it. I've had enough PR talk for 1 week. It's not about work." She stepped closer, trying to keep her voice steady. "James, I'm pregnant." The words left her like an offering. He went still. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the whisper of rain. Then slowly he turned toward her, and she saw the flicker in his eyes, Not joy, not even surprise. Something colder. You're what? Pregnant, she said again, quieter this time. 3 months. For a heartbeat, she waited for him to smile, to pull her into his arms. Instead he laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't belong in the home they'd built. Of course you are. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? He set down his glass, each movement deliberate. I mean, I should have known this would happen. You've been looking for a way to secure your place, haven't you? A baby, the oldest trick in the book. The words hit her like glass shattering in her chest. James, how can you even say that? We've talked about having children. You talked, he cut in. I listened. There's a difference. Her hands trembled. This isn't a trap. It's our child. Our. He smiled, cruel and calm. You think I'm stupid enough to believe that? I'm out every day dealing with people who'd kill to take a piece of what I've built. You think I don't recognize manipulation when I see it? Her throat tightened. You're saying I'd lie about something like this? I'm saying you've been playing a part since the day I met you, he said evenly. The modest grad student. The humble background. The girl who claimed she didn't care about money. I fell for it, I admit it. I thought you were different. She shook her head, tears spilling despite herself. I am different. I loved you when you had nothing to prove. He picked up his drink, took a long swallow, and stared out the window at the storm. Love is an illusion. Ambition, that's real. She moved toward him, desperate now. James, please. Don't do this. You're tired. You're angry about something else. We can talk. He turned back, eyes like stone. We're not talking. We're done. Her knees went weak. Done. I'll have my lawyers send the papers in the morning. He walked past her, heading for the bedroom. You can pack whatever you bought with my money. She froze where she stood, the scent of rain and jasmine collapsing into nausea. Behind her, the candles flickered, tiny flames fighting against the storm building inside the apartment. He stopped at the doorway, looking back with a faint, disdainful smile. You were an experiment, Rosemary. A poor one. And it's over. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. She stood there, trembling, the test still clutched in her hand. Then the first sob tore through her chest. The rain had turned feral by the time the elevator doors opened to the private lobby. Rosemary stumbled out, still in her silk dress, her fingers numb from gripping the edge of her suitcase. She hadn't even realized she'd packed, or that she'd let his security team walk her out of the home she'd helped build. Everything had happened in a blur. One moment she was pleading. The next, the doorbell rang and 2 uniformed men appeared at James's silent command. Please escort Mrs. Arnold downstairs, he'd said, voice flat, eyes already on his phone. Mrs. Arnold. The last time he'd used the name. She tried to argue, to remind him she was carrying his child, but her words fell against marble like broken glass. Now she stood under the canopy of the building's grand entrance, the city a chaos of headlights and water. The doorman shifted awkwardly, pretending not to stare at the beautiful woman with mascara streaked down her face. Ma'am, one of the guards said softly, is there somewhere you'd like us to drop you? Her voice cracked. No. I'll manage. He hesitated, then nodded and stepped back inside, leaving her alone beneath the storm. The luxury towers of Midtown loomed like silent witnesses, their glass faces reflecting her humiliation. Her suitcase, a designer set James had bought her on their honeymoon, sat by her feet, heavy with everything she could grab in 10 frantic minutes. She looked down at her hand. The pregnancy test still gleamed faintly beneath the streetlight, the 2 pink lines smudged but visible. For a moment, she pressed it against her chest, as though it could anchor her to something solid. And then she began to walk. The rain drenched her hair, soaked the silk of her dress until it clung like a second skin. The city swallowed her, honking horns, neon lights blurring in her tears. She passed a cafe where a couple laughed over coffee, a boutique where women in heels sipped champagne. The world moved on, oblivious to the collapse of hers. When she finally stopped, it was at the edge of the Hudson Promenade. The wind tore at her, the water dark and restless below. She leaned against the railing, shaking. He'd called her a poor experiment. She remembered how proud she'd been of his brilliance, how she defended his arrogance as driven, his cruelty as stress. She believed that behind the sharp edges was the man who once held her hand through graduate nights, whispering, "We'll conquer the world, Rosie." The irony bit deep. He had conquered it. But she'd been left behind, discarded like a failed prototype. A car splashed past, sending a wave of water over her shoes. Somewhere in her chest, anger sparked through the sorrow, faint but alive. She whispered into the wind, voice trembling. "You'll see me again, James. But when you do, you won't recognize me." Her phone buzzed. Elena, the only friend she still had. Rosemary ignored it. She couldn't speak. Not yet. Not while the ache in her ribs still felt like it might split her apart. Instead, she sank onto a bench under the flickering glow of a street lamp. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, her suitcase beside her like an abandoned memory. She thought of the tiny lives growing inside her, heartbeats she'd heard just a week ago on the ultrasound. She remembered the doctor's smile. "Everything looks perfect. Strong, steady, all three." 3. The thought steadied her breathing. She wasn't alone. She would never be alone again. Closing her eyes, she pressed her palm to her abdomen. "You'll never need him," she whispered. "You'll never beg for love. I'll make sure of it." Thunder rolled across the river, deep and distant. She sat there for a long time, until the lights of the city blurred into a watercolor of pain and resolve. Somewhere behind her, the tower that bore his name cut into the clouds like a blade, beautiful, brilliant, and heartless. She turned her back on it and began to walk. Winter arrived hard that year, the kind of cold that crept under doors and into bones. 6 months had passed since the night everything broke. The city had moved on, as it always did. But Rosemary Chun, once the elegant wife of a billionaire, now lived in a single room above a closed herbal shop in Chinatown. The wallpaper peeled. The radiator hissed. Her bed was an old hospital cot she'd bought secondhand, its frame squeaking every time she turned. Outside, snow drifted over the streets like ash. She'd been working part-time at a local clinic for months, translating for elderly patients and cleaning instruments after hours. It was enough to keep her fed, barely. Every dollar she saved went toward prenatal vitamins and baby clothes bought from thrift stores. That night, she woke to a sharp pain tearing across her abdomen. It was too soon, she thought. Too soon. But the contractions came fast, relentless, wave after wave. She tried to reach her phone, but it slipped from her trembling hand. The room spun. Her neighbor, Mrs. Lee, heard the noise through the thin walls and burst in moments later. "Rosemary, you're in labor, child." By the time they reached the county hospital, snow was falling thick as feathers. The fluorescent lights of the emergency ward felt cruelly bright. "Name?" the nurse asked briskly. "Chen." "Rosemary." "Insurance?" Rosemary hesitated. "No. Not yet." The nurse's expression softened a little. "We'll sort it out later. Let's get you in." Hours blurred into each other, pain, exhaustion, the sound of voices calling numbers she couldn't focus on. She clutched the side rails, gasping, whispering promises to the lives inside her. "You're strong," she told them. "You're mine. Don't be afraid." The doctor's voice came through the haze. "We're ready." First ones crowning. Then came the first cry, sharp and small, slicing through the air like hope reborn. Rosemary sobbed as they placed the tiny girl against her chest. "Mara," she whispered. "My first light." Minutes later, another cry followed, stronger this time. "Clara," she said, smiling through tears. "My voice." And then, after what felt like forever, the third. The smallest, her skin flushed rose-pink, her fists curling with fierce determination. "Cinderella," Rosemary breathed. "My miracle." The doctor laughed softly. 3 girls. Perfectly healthy. "You've done something extraordinary, Ms. Chun." Rosemary looked down at them. 3 perfect faces, 3 pairs of dark eyes identical to James's. The resemblance was undeniable. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. Not because of pain, but because of how beautiful they were. When the nurses left and the room fell quiet, she reached for the small suitcase she'd carried from place to place since that night. Inside, wrapped in tissue, were the baby shoes she'd once meant to give him. She placed them on the metal tray beside the bed, beside 3 tiny ID bracelets. "See, my darlings," she whispered. "I thought I was preparing for one miracle. But there were 3 of you all along." The babies shifted softly against her, their breathing synchronized, their warmth filling the sterile hospital air. Outside the window, dawn began to bleed into the sky, pale orange over the snow-covered city. Rosemary traced a fingertip over Mara's cheek, then Clara's, then Cinderella's. "You don't need his name," she murmured. "You'll have your own. You'll have mine." She leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her, but there was peace now, deep, quiet, resolute. Somewhere beyond the city, in a glass tower bearing his name, James Arnold was likely pouring champagne with his new fiancée, unaware that his legacy had already been born in a forgotten hospital room. Rosemary smiled faintly at the thought. "I don't need revenge," she whispered. "I just need time." The triplets stirred, one of them releasing a tiny sigh. "Sleep, my loves," she said softly, eyes closing. "The world doesn't know it yet, but it belongs to us." The snow kept falling, blanketing the city in silence. And beneath that hush, a mother and her 3 daughters slept, the first night of the life they would build from ashes. The first months were a blur of sleepless nights and formula stains. The hospital released her with 3 infants, a stack of discharge papers, and a bill larger than anything she could comprehend. She had no insurance, no savings, and no husband's name to lean on, only her wits and a stubborn refusal to give up. Her new home was a 1-bedroom walk-up in Queens, the kind of place where pipes clanged at night and the walls smelled faintly of mildew. The crib was second-hand. The bottles mismatched. The neighbors played music too loud. But when the babies slept, 3 tiny bundles of warmth pressed against each other, the room glowed with a kind of fragile peace. Rosemary lived on caffeine and willpower. She took any job she could find, receptionist at a clinic by day, dishwasher at a noodle shop by night. On good days, she'd make it home by midnight. On bad days, dawn would already be coloring the sky when she finally collapsed into bed, still in her uniform, surrounded by the steady rhythm of her daughter's breathing. Some nights she'd wake to one of them crying and realize all 3 were hungry. She'd hold one in each arm while the third waited, red-faced and furious, and she'd whisper through tears, "Hold on, sweetheart. Mama's coming." Her hands cracked from washing dishes. Her back ached constantly. She kept a notebook by the sink, scribbling formula ideas in between feedings. Not baby formula, chemical formulas. Molecules. Structures. The language she'd once spoken fluently at MIT before life had rewritten her script. The notebook became her sanctuary. The one place she still felt like herself. When she was too tired to write, she'd talk to her sleeping girls instead. "You have no idea," she whispered one night, "how hard it is to stay standing. But we will. We always will." One rainy afternoon, when the triplets were almost 2, the landlord banged on her door demanding late rent. She gave him half of what she owed and a promise for the rest. When he left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the baby bottles on the counter, she sank onto the floor and pressed her palms to her eyes. She couldn't keep living like this. She had degrees from MIT, intelligence that could rival any man she'd ever met, including the one who'd broken her, yet here she was, scraping by on minimum wage and exhaustion. Her gaze fell on a small wooden chest tucked beneath the cot. It had belonged to her grandmother, Mei Chun, the legendary herbalist from Hong Kong who'd raised her after her parents' death. Inside were brittle pages covered in her grandmother's looping calligraphy, formulas for balms, tonics, and salves. Ancient recipes passed down through generations. As a child, Rosemary used to watch her grandmother grind roots and leaves, murmuring, "Nature never withholds her miracles, only her secrets." She opened the notebook now, and the scent of dried herbs and ink rose faintly into the room. Reading through the faded lines, she felt something stir: memory, curiosity, purpose. That night, after putting the girls to bed, she cleared the rickety kitchen counter, lined up a few cheap glass bowls, and began to mix. Green tea extract. Aloe. Pearl powder. Nothing expensive, just what she could find at local apothecaries. When she applied the paste to her wrist, it felt cool, soothing. The next morning, the small burn mark she'd gotten from the restaurant stove looked visibly lighter. She stared at it, heart pounding. Could it really work? Over the next few weeks, she tested variations, recording everything meticulously. She combined her grandmother's herbal intuition with her own biochemical precision, adjusting ratios and pH levels until the compound felt alive in her hands. At first, she made small batches, giving samples to tired waitresses and nurses at the clinic. They came back with glowing faces, literally. Word spread. Strangers began knocking on her apartment door, asking for that cream the doctor makes. For the first time in years, Rosemary felt something other than exhaustion. She felt momentum. One night, as she balanced her checkbook and calculated ingredient costs, her pen slipped. The numbers didn't add up. The demand was growing faster than her budget could sustain. She needed capital, real capital. That's when she remembered something she'd almost forgotten. In the chaos of her early marriage, she'd once opened an account at a private bank in Hong Kong, a legacy her grandmother had arranged for her when she turned 21. It wasn't just sentimental, it was substantial. A trust fund, locked behind her grandmother's will until she was 30. James had never known about it. She'd hidden it deliberately, terrified that revealing her wealth would taint what she thought was love. Now she realized that decision, once born of naivety, had become her salvation. She dug through old folders until she found the sealed documents, yellowed but intact. Her heart raced as she dialed the number on the letterhead. Within minutes, a calm voice confirmed what she dared not hope. Yes, Dr. Chen. The account remains active. The balance has appreciated with interest. Would you like to access the funds? For a moment she couldn't speak. Tears pricked her eyes. Her grandmother had saved her, across oceans and beyond death. Yes, she whispered finally. Transfer it to New York. Every cent. But she didn't use it to pay off her debts or buy comfort. She used it to build. With part of the trust fund, Rosemary rented a small storefront at the corner of 38th and Elm. Nothing glamorous, just a faded green awning and a cracked window that read for lease. She scrubbed the floors herself, painted the walls pale ivory, and hung a wooden sign above the door. Chen Remedies, herbal science for modern skin. Inside, she set up a single counter, a mixing table, and shelves lined with amber jars and handwritten labels. The air smelled faintly of ginseng and lavender. At first, customers were curious but skeptical. Then came the miracle. An aging actress visited after hearing about the young doctor who heals scars. 2 weeks later, she returned, radiant, astonished. Her testimonial spread like wildfire through whispers and salons. Soon, Rosemary's quiet little shop was crowded from morning till dusk. She hired a local college student to help watch the girls in the back room while she worked the front, her white lab coat flecked with powdered herbs. At night, after closing, she'd bring the triplets out to the counter, set them on the marble surface, and let them giggle as she wrapped jars in brown paper. "See this, Mara?" she'd say, tapping a bottle. "That's called perseverance. Clara, this one? That's chemistry and patience. And you, Cinderella, this one's faith." She sold her creams under the name Rose Chun, keeping her full identity hidden. The work was relentless, but for the first time, it was hers. The profits went straight back into research. She bought better equipment, sterilized the workspace, registered the trademark. 6 months later, she signed her first licensing deal with a small cosmetics distributor. A year later, Chun Remedies had tripled its revenue. And one night, as she watched her daughters sleeping side by side, their identical faces serene in the lamplight, she realized she was no longer surviving. She was building. She sat at the edge of their tiny bed, brushed a curl from Mara's forehead, and whispered into the quiet room. "They said we were nothing." Her voice broke softly, but there was pride in it now, steel threaded through sorrow. "I'll show them what nothing can become." She turned off the light. Outside, the city hummed, unaware that in a cramped apartment above a modest shop, a woman who had once been thrown out into the rain was quietly rewriting her destiny. Time, Rosemary discovered, was the most ruthless teacher, but also the fairest. Years passed, measured not in heartbreak anymore, but in milestones. The little shop on 38th and Elm that had once smelled of lavender and ginseng now hummed with machinery and quiet ambition. Chun Remedies had outgrown its shelves, its street, even its name. The formula, her grandmother's legacy merged with her own chemistry, had exploded in popularity. Beauty magazines called it the miracle blend that turns back time. Dermatologists tried to reverse engineer it and failed. Within 3 years, she'd registered 4 patents, each iteration more advanced than the last. She expanded. First to a small laboratory. Then to a second. Then a corporate suite in Midtown Manhattan. She hired a team of researchers, young brilliant scientists who looked at her with reverence, not pity. She still wore the same simple lab coat, still rolled up her sleeves, still stayed the last to leave. Every decision she made was methodical. Reinvest profits. Study competitors. Negotiate licensing deals with precision. Soon, pharmaceutical giants began circling like hawks, eager to buy what she'd built. But Rosemary didn't sell. Not yet. She wanted something larger, something permanent. That was when she began work on what she would later call Project Phoenix, a molecular regeneration compound that not only rejuvenated skin cells but repaired them at the DNA level. It was revolutionary. It was dangerous. And it would change everything. By the 5th year, Chen Remedies had transformed into Chin Biotech, and later into Chin Therapeutics, a name that echoed both medicine and rebirth. The day her breakthrough results came in, Rosemary was in the lab, her hair tied back, safety goggles slipping slightly as she leaned over the microscope. Dr. Chun, her lead biochemist, Amir Patel, said breathlessly, "We ran the culture tests 3 times. The compound doesn't just regenerate tissue, it reverses oxidative aging at the cellular level." Rosemary looked up slowly. "Confirm it with the molecular scanner." Amir's hands trembled as the machine beeped. Confirmed. For a long moment, Rosemary said nothing. She simply watched the data flashing across the screen, the culmination of every sleepless night, every tear shed in a 1-bedroom apartment, every whispered promise to 3 little girls. "Document everything," she said finally. "And make sure it's encrypted." Within a month, offers poured in from the biggest pharmaceutical corporations in the world: Vanguard Labs, Eterniskin, Orium Pharma. The numbers were obscene: $50 million, $80 million, $120 million. She turned them all down. Instead, she proposed something audacious: joint licensing, with Chin Therapeutics retaining full intellectual property rights. It was unheard of for an independent founder. They called her insane. Then she published her first white paper. Overnight, the world knew her name, or at least, her company's. Chin Therapeutics became synonymous with innovation. The press wanted to know who Dr. R. Chin was, but her team deflected every inquiry. Rosemary remained a ghost in her own success, content to let the work speak for her. By the end of the year, the company's valuation crossed $1.2 billion. Her daughters grew as her empire grew, each of them bright in ways that took her breath away. At 6, Mara was already building circuits out of old calculators. Clara wrote short stories in perfect Mandarin and English. Cinderella, the quietest, could hear a piece of music once and play it by ear on their old upright piano. They were her compass, her reason. Every night, no matter how late she came home, she kissed each one good night and whispered, "You are why I built all this." She never told them about their father, not yet. She wanted them to grow up knowing success as something self-made, not inherited. When they turned 7, she enrolled them in Ashford Academy, one of New York's most prestigious schools. Ironically, it was owned by the Ashford family, the same dynasty her ex-husband's new fiancée Victoria came from. Rosemary didn't flinch at the coincidence. She almost laughed at the symmetry of it. Fate had a wicked sense of humor. The year Chin Therapeutics went public, the IPO shattered expectations. The company debuted under the ticker symbol CHINX, opening at $40 per share and closing at $86 on its first day. Analysts called it the biotech phenomenon of the decade. Yet no one knew that the woman behind the empire was the same Rosemary Chun, who had once been escorted out of a penthouse in the rain. She'd kept her identity buried behind legal veils and holding companies. The public face of Chin Therapeutics was a stoic corporate board. Her own name appeared nowhere in the filings. The world saw her as an enigmatic genius, a mystery scientist known only as Dr. R. Chun. And she preferred it that way. Behind the anonymity, she grew wealthier than James Arnold had ever been. Her net worth quietly surpassed $2 billion. Her company's stock continued to climb, and global investors begged for a seat at her table. But for Rosemary, the real satisfaction wasn't the money. It was watching her daughters thrive in the world that once seemed determined to destroy her. She'd gone from boiling herbs on a cracked stove to leading a research facility where Nobel laureates requested internships. The phoenix had not just risen, she had learned how to soar. The The first time Rosemary crossed paths, almost, with her past, it happened at a school event. Ashford Academy's annual Founders Gala filled its marble atrium with chandeliers and champagne. Parents mingled in tuxedos and gowns, the air heavy with money and mild hypocrisy. Rosemary, elegant as ever in a sleek black evening dress, arrived quietly. She preferred not to draw attention, but it was difficult not to. Heads turned when she walked in. Mara and Clara were performing in the Student Science Showcase, while Cinderella was scheduled to play piano during the intermission. As she admired a display of robotics projects, she overheard a familiar name, Victoria Ashford. Turning slightly, she saw her, statuesque blonde, wearing diamonds the size of raindrops. Victoria laughed loudly, surrounded by other society wives, a flute of champagne in hand. "James insisted we make this donation," she was saying. "He's always been passionate about supporting education. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with him, his generosity." Rosemary's lips curved faintly. She recognized that tone, the performative affection of someone in love with power, not people. Another woman replied, "Isn't James Arnold the real estate mogul who built Ocean View Estates?" "The very same," Victoria said proudly. "We're finalizing our wedding plans this summer. It'll be the social event of the year. The press can't get enough of us." Her words floated through the room like perfume, sweet, heavy, and toxic. Rosemary felt no bitterness now, only clarity. The man who once threw her out into the rain was about to marry into a family that now relied on her company's pharmaceutical supply contracts. The irony was almost poetic. When Cinderella began to play her piano piece, delicate, haunting, the room fell silent. Rosemary watched her daughter's small fingers glide over the keys, creating beauty that needed no validation. She glanced once more toward Victoria, who clapped politely, unaware that the little girl on stage was the mirror image of her future husband's face. When the applause erupted, Rosemary smiled. Not smugly, not cruelly, just with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had made peace with the past and mastered it. Fate, she thought, doesn't always punish. Sometimes, it simply waits. Later that night, back at home, she tucked the triplets into bed. The city lights shimmered outside their penthouse window, a real penthouse this time, one she had bought herself. "Did you like my song, Mama?" Cinderella murmured sleepily. "I loved it," Rosemary whispered. "It was perfect." Clara yawned. "Are you coming to the school fair next week?" "Of course. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Mara blinked up at her. "Mama, why do you work so much?" Rosemary smiled faintly. "Because work builds things that last." She kissed their foreheads one by one, turned off the light, and stood by the door watching them breathe. 3 miracles, 3 reasons she had risen from nothing. As she stepped into her study, her reflection in the glass caught her attention. The same woman James had once dismissed as a poor experiment, now stood unbreakable, luminous in success. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant. "Vanguard Pharma has doubled their offer for the global distribution deal." Rosemary typed back, "Tell them we'll discuss after the board meeting. Also, confirm our Ashford Academy contract renewal." She smiled at the thought. The Ashfords would soon be thanking her company for their record profits, without ever realizing who was behind it. Before turning off the lights, she whispered softly to the empty room, "Let the past keep its illusions. I'll keep my empire." And outside, the skyline glowed like fire against the night, a crown for the phoenix who had finally learned to own her wings. Morning light spilled across the skyline, catching on the glass towers that now seemed to bow before Chen Therapeutics. From her corner office, Rosemary Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, coffee in hand, watching Manhattan stretch awake beneath her. The email from Elena glowed faintly on her tablet screen. Ocean View Estate confirmed. The ceremony is on June 15th, 4 p.m. Guest list, 400. Ashford Alexander Group is sponsoring decor and press coverage. Bride, Victoria Ashford. Groom, James Arnold. The name didn't hurt anymore. It simply resonated, like a note she had once known how to play. 7 years ago, the sound of it had hollowed her. Now, it made her smile. Rosemary closed the file, set the tablet down, and turned to her reflection in the glass. Her hair was darker now, glossier. Her posture carried the composure of someone who knew exactly who she was. Operation Vindication, she thought. Not revenge, never revenge. This was about truth, about balance restored. Behind her, the door opened softly. Elena Ruiz entered, clutching a notepad and wearing her usual mixture of nerves and awe. "You're really going," she said. Rosemary turned, her voice smooth as silk. "Of course I am. He asked me to bear witness to his success. It would be rude to decline." Elena smiled nervously. "You're terrifying, you know that?" "Only when necessary." She took a sip of her coffee, setting it down with deliberate grace. "I want the best stylists, the best designers, and a car that announces itself before I ever step out of it." Elena's eyebrows shot up. "So the full transformation arc?" Rosemary smiled. "Not transformation. Revelation." Within hours, her penthouse became a revolving door of elite fashion consultants and stylists. Swatches of silk, velvet, and lace covered the living room. Designers whispered in French and Italian, measuring, sketching, arguing softly over which color would capture power without cruelty. "Red," Rosemary said finally, cutting through their debate. "A deep crimson. The shade of a woman who's already survived the fire." The head designer, a tall Parisian named Lucien, nodded reverently. "Crimson it is, Dr. Chun." She stood still as they measured her, the curve of her shoulders, the line of her waist, the fall of her hair. Every movement, every gesture, every decision radiated quiet authority. When the fittings ended, she dismissed the team and turned to Elena, who was waiting with a folder in her hands. "They confirmed the limo booking," Elena said. "Stretched Rolls-Royce Phantom. Custom interior. Black with red detailing. Perfect." Rosemary walked to her desk. "And the girls?" Elena smiled. "They're in the study. They got some news from the academy." Rosemary's expression softened instantly. "Good news. You'll want to hear it from them." The triplets were sprawled across the study floor when she entered, books, laptops, and crayons scattered around them in organized chaos. "Mama." Clara jumped up first, her curls bouncing. "We got the letter." "What letter?" Rosemary asked, kneeling down. "The National Gifted Program." Mara said, waving a printed document. "They picked us, all three." Rosemary's heart swelled. "All three." Cinderella nodded solemnly, the quietest of the three, always the observer. "They said it's the first time triplets have ever been accepted together." Rosemary took the letter, scanning it quickly. There it was, in crisp black print. "We are pleased to inform you that Mara, Clara, and Cinderella Chun have been selected for the National Gifted Scholars Initiative." Her throat tightened. She blinked hard, smiling through the rush of emotion. "You've made me prouder than I can say." Clara grinned. "Does this mean we can celebrate?" "After the wedding," Rosemary said lightly. "The wedding?" Mara tilted her head. "The one with him?" Rosemary hesitated. Her daughters had grown up without the shadow of James Arnold, but they were old enough now to sense what wasn't said. "Yes," she said finally. "You'll meet your father soon." Cinderella's brow furrowed. "Are we going because he wants to see us?" Rosemary paused, then sat on the floor with them, folding her legs beneath her. "We're going," she said gently, "because he invited me. But I won't hide you. The world deserves to see who you are. And you deserve to see where you came from." Mara chewed her lip. "Will he like us?" Rosemary smiled softly. "He'll be speechless." "And you," she said, brushing a lock of hair from Clara's face, "you owe him nothing. You already carry everything that matters." The girls nodded, their expressions solemn with the kind of understanding that comes too early to children of strong mothers. That evening, the penthouse glowed with quiet activity. Tailors brought fabric samples. Jewelers arrived with velvet trays. The housekeeper set tea beside a pile of invitations and notes. Elena leaned against the doorway, watching Rosemary review a schedule. "I have to ask," she said. "What's your plan when you get there? Are you going to, I don't know, expose him? Humiliate him?" Rosemary looked up, her eyes calm but unreadable. "No, Elena. That's what he'd expect. He thinks I'll show up angry, desperate to prove him wrong." "So what's the plan then?" Rosemary smiled faintly. "Presents. I'll let my existence do the work. Elena tilted her head. Presence. He thinks he invited a ghost from his past, Rosemary said, her voice dropping to a velvet whisper. He doesn't realize he's summoned the storm. Elena exhaled slowly. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Rosemary's expression softened. You never could. You believed in me when no one else did. I still do, Elena said. But, Rosemary, are you sure you're ready? I mean, emotionally. For a moment, Rosemary didn't answer. She looked past Elena to the city lights outside the window, the skyline she had conquered piece by piece. I've been ready for 7 years, she said quietly. This isn't about him anymore. It's about closure. A week later, the dress arrived. Lucien himself brought it, flanked by assistants carrying garment bags like sacred relics. When they unveiled it, the room seemed to exhale. The gown was breathtaking, deep crimson silk that shimmered like liquid flame, the bodice sculpted, the train cascading in ripples of shadow and light. Rosemary reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric. It's perfect. It's power made tangible, Lucien said, bowing slightly. When you walk into that room, no one will remember anyone else. After the team left, Rosemary stood before the mirror, holding the gown against her. Elena hovered nearby, phone in hand. Do you want me to confirm the limo time? 2:45, Rosemary said. Not a minute earlier. Elena nodded. And the children's outfits? Black dresses with pink sashes. Classic, timeless. I don't want spectacle, I want symmetry. Understood. Elena hesitated, then smiled. You know, you're scaring me again. In a good way. Rosemary laughed softly. Good. Fear means I'm doing it right. When Elena left, the apartment grew quiet. The girls were already asleep, their laughter fading into dreams. Rosemary carried the crimson gown into her bedroom, hanging it by the tall mirror. The silk glimmered in the low light, alive, breathing. She stood before it in silence, the city reflected in the glass behind her, towers and stars blending into one vast expanse. Her reflection stared back at her, framed in fire-red silk. For a moment, she saw two versions of herself, the woman who had once been broken, and the woman who had rebuilt herself from the shards. She ran a hand along the dress, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't revenge, she said. It's remembrance. And release. Her gaze drifted to the photograph on her nightstand. 3 girls, laughing on a beach in summer sunlight. They'll see us, she murmured. All of us. She turned back to the mirror, squaring her shoulders. What stared back was not fear. Not uncertainty. Not the trembling woman once left in the rain. It was power. Pure, radiant, unstoppable power. And when she finally turned off the light, the crimson gown shimmered in the dark like a promise, or a warning. June 15th dawned flawless, the kind of crystalline morning that wedding photographers pray for. The sky was an endless expanse of blue, the Atlantic gleaming below like molten glass. Ocean View Estate, perched on a marble cliff in Southampton, had never looked more regal. Its sweeping terraces shimmered beneath white silk canopies, and rows of orchids spilled over the balustrades in pastel perfection. A string quartet played softly near the pavilion. Waiters glided between tables of champagne flutes, their trays gleaming. 400 of the city's elite were already gathered, politicians, CEOs, heiresses, faces familiar from magazine covers. The air buzzed with polite laughter and wealth. At the center of it all stood James Arnold, the groom. His tuxedo was immaculate, his posture commanding, his smile rehearsed. He looked exactly like the man the tabloids adored, visionary billionaire, self-made success story. He greeted guests with effortless charm, shaking hands, clapping shoulders. James, you've outdone yourself, said a senator's wife, admiring the ocean view. Only the best for Victoria, he replied smoothly, glancing toward his fiancée, Victoria Ashford, who stood beneath an arch of white roses, radiant in custom Dior. Her parents, Margaret and Richard Ashford, hovered nearby, social royalty in every sense. Margaret's pearls gleamed like badges of power. You've come a long way, James, Richard said approvingly. From scrappy investor to New York's most talked-about mogul. My daughter couldn't have chosen better. James laughed modestly, the sound perfectly measured. I've been fortunate. The right deals, the right timing, and now the right woman. Victoria beamed and kissed his cheek for the cameras. Photographers flashed. Guests applauded. If anyone noticed the faint strain in James's eyes, the flicker of unease behind the practiced confidence, they dismissed it as pre-wedding nerves. He looked out toward the ocean, and for a brief, inexplicable second, his reflection shimmered in the glass doors, fractured like a man caught between two lives. Then someone called his name, and the illusion vanished. Inside the reception tent, the conversations flowed like champagne. James's company just landed that international housing contract, a woman murmured. And Victoria's family controls the Ashford Trust. Old money meets new. It's a perfect union. They say he's planning to run for public office. Truly, a man who has everything. James overheard fragments of it, each word feeding the armor of his ego. He'd worked hard to bury the ghosts, the failed marriage, the scandalous rumors about a woman he'd once known. He'd rewritten his story so completely that sometimes he almost believed it himself, that Rosemary Chun had been a mistake, a chapter erased. Today, he was untouchable. He raised his glass to Victoria and her parents, offering his signature smile. To new beginnings, he said. To perfect ones, Victoria added. At precisely 2:47 p.m., 15 minutes before the ceremony, the estate's serenity rippled. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom turned onto the long circular drive, sunlight glinting off its polished surface. The car's hum was low, deliberate, the sound of wealth, but of a different kind. Photographers instinctively shifted. Guests turned their heads. "Who's that?" whispered a socialite near the champagne fountain. "I don't see her name on the guest list." "It must be one of Victoria's friends, European maybe?" The car slowed to a stop at the edge of the red carpet walkway. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the chauffeur stepped out, walked to the rear door, and opened it with ceremonial precision. The first thing visible was a flash of crimson silk. Rosemary Chun stepped out of the limousine like a vision conjured from memory and fire. The sun struck the fabric of her gown, deep crimson, luminous, fluid as liquid rubies. It clung to her like purpose itself, every movement composed, unhurried, impossible to ignore. Her hair fell in smooth waves, her lips matched the boldness of her dress, and diamonds glittered at her ears like captured stars. For a moment, the estate fell silent. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the string quartet faltered. She stood at the end of the red carpet, elegance made flesh, poised, commanding, serene. And then the second door opened. 3 little girls stepped out, one after another, dressed in matching black dresses with rose-pink sashes tied neatly around their waists. Their hair was styled in identical curls, ribbons glinting in the light. They moved with the calm assurance of children who'd been taught grace, not arrogance. And when the crowd saw their faces, the sharp jawline, the deep dark eyes, the confident tilt of the chin, the silence fractured into gasps. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "They look like..." They can't be. But they were. Every feature, every expression mirrored James Arnold in miniature. Rosemary took each daughter's hand, Mara on the left, Clara in the middle, Cinderella on the right, and began walking down the carpet toward the terrace. Her stride was slow, measured. Every step an act of quiet reclamation. The whispers followed her like ripples on water. "Is that her?" "Who?" "His ex-wife." "I thought she disappeared." "She doesn't look like someone who disappeared." Margaret Ashford turned sharply, her social instincts alert. "Who invited her?" she demanded under her breath. Victoria frowned. "I don't know. She must be mistaken, maybe one of the vendors." And then James turned. For one infinite moment, their eyes met across the distance, 7 years collapsing into a single heartbeat. His hand, which had been resting casually on his champagne glass, went slack. The crystal stem slipped between his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Every head turned. Victoria followed his gaze, confused. "James." But he didn't answer. He couldn't. He stood rooted to the spot, staring at the woman he'd once thrown into the rain, radiant now, unbroken, holding the hands of 3 living reminders of everything he denied. Rosemary stopped at the edge of the terrace, the ocean wind lifting the edge of her crimson gown. Her daughters looked up at her, waiting. She gave them a small nod. Together, they took one more step forward. The crowd parted instinctively. Whispers flared like sparks. Those children. Do you see their faces? They're his mirror. Victoria's fiancé has. Margaret Ashford's expression froze into polite horror. She glanced between the children and James, her mind calculating faster than her composure could mask. Victoria's fingers tightened around her bouquet. James, she said through a strained smile, who is that? James couldn't answer. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Rosemary, perfectly composed, gave a small, serene smile and began to climb the steps toward the pavilion. Every camera turned toward her. The sunlight caught her gown, the diamonds at her throat, the tiny hands she held. It was a tableau of power, unforced, undeniable, inevitable. When she reached the top, she turned her head just slightly, meeting James's stunned gaze across the crowd. Her voice carried easily through the salt-scented air. Don't look so surprised, James. You invited me. The murmurs turned into a low, electric hum. Victoria blinked, realization dawning too slowly. You know her. James still couldn't move. And then one of the guests whispered, too loudly, that's Dr. Rosemary Chun. From Chin Therapeutics. The words struck like a match. Gasps followed. The name carried weight, the billionaire scientist, the mysterious founder who had redefined modern medicine. Eyes widened. Phones came out discreetly. Photographers clicked. Victoria's mother, Margaret, stepped forward uncertainly, her voice trembling. Dr. Chen? You're the Chun Therapeutics. Rosemary inclined her head with quiet grace. The same. Margaret's face blanched. You're one of our largest suppliers. Rosemary's smile deepened, polite, measured, devastating. So I've heard. The quartet had stopped playing entirely. The sea wind carried only the soft sound of waves and whispers. James's world tilted. His fiancée's family, his investors, his colleagues, all were watching. Every lie he'd built about his tragic first marriage and his fresh start began to unravel in real time. Victoria looked at the triplets again, her voice barely audible. They look exactly like you. And in that moment, as the realization swept through the crowd, as eyes turned from him to her, James Arnold understood that his own wedding had just become a stage for his reckoning. Rosemary didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply turned to her daughters and said quietly, "Say hello, girls." The triplets stepped forward with perfect composure, their voices soft and steady. "Good afternoon." The sound rippled through the gathering like a benediction and a verdict all at once. For the first time that day, even the sea seemed to hold its breath. The stage was set. Inside the oceanfront pavilion, the music faltered, then stopped entirely. Every head turned toward the terrace steps where Rosemary Chin stood, crimson silk catching the sunlight, three small figures beside her like living echoes. The murmuring stilled, replaced by a silence so sharp it could have been cut. At the center of the altar, James Arnold froze mid-sentence, one hand still holding his champagne flute aloft. His jaw tightened, his pulse visibly flickered at the base of his neck. 7 years. 7 years without her face, her voice, the reminder of what he had chosen to discard. And yet here she was, not the trembling woman he'd once thrown into the rain, but someone untouchable, regal, composed. A woman who made the marble floors and chandeliers seem secondary. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "Hello, James." Her voice carried clearly across the air, calm, steady, unshakable. For the first time in his carefully curated life, James Arnold had no control of the room. He stared at her as though seeing a ghost. Every fragment of denial, every illusion he'd built, shattered beneath the reality standing before him. Her beauty hadn't faded, it had sharpened. Her confidence had matured into something far more dangerous, grace. And the three girls standing beside her, identical luminous, eyes the same dark hue as his, left no room for rationalization. They looked at him with polite curiosity, not affection. They were strangers who shared his face. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "Rosemary, what are you doing here?" She smiled faintly, accepting an invitation. The ripple of laughter that followed was nervous, uneasy. Cameras clicked discreetly, phones lifted behind handbags and champagne flutes. Rosemary took a slow step forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble. The The sound echoed like punctuation. "Since you were kind enough to invite me," she said, her tone smooth as glass, "I thought it was only proper that I introduce you to some people you haven't met." She turned to the girls. "Mara, Clara, Cinderella, this is Mr. Arnold." The triplets looked up at him in perfect unison, their posture flawless. "This," Rosemary said evenly, "is your father." The words detonated through the pavilion. Gasps rippled like waves. James went pale. "Rosemary, that can't." But the girls stepped forward before he could finish. Each extended a hand, as she taught them, confident, polite, devastatingly poised. "Pleased to meet you, sir," they said together, voices clear as bells. A murmur swept the guests. Someone whispered, "They look exactly like him." Victoria's bouquet trembled in her grip. "James, what is she talking about?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. He had no answer. Rosemary tilted her head slightly, studying him with quiet detachment. "You always did enjoy pretending inconvenient truths didn't exist," she said softly. He took a step forward, lowering his voice. "You shouldn't have come." "Oh, on the contrary," she said. "I couldn't miss it. After all, you made such an effort to invite me." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the guests again. The tension was exquisite, the kind that made people hold their breath even as they couldn't look away. From the front row, Margaret Ashford, Victoria's mother, stepped forward, squinting as though trying to place a face she'd seen before. "I beg your pardon," she said, her tone controlled but curious. "You're Dr. Rosemary Chun, aren't you?" Rosemary turned slightly toward her. "Yes, Mrs. Ashford. We've never met formally, though I understand our businesses have." Margaret blinked. "Chun, as in Chun Therapeutics?" "The same," Rosemary replied. For a heartbeat, Margaret simply stared. Then her composure fractured, and she turned sharply toward James. "James," she hissed under her breath, loud enough for the first few rows to hear, "is this the Dr. Chin? The one our company works with?" James's silence was answer enough. Margaret's face drained of color. "You told us your ex-wife was some unemployed social climber. You said she'd run off." Rosemary raised an elegant brow. "I was busy running clinical trials, Mrs. Ashford. They tend to take time." A ripple of shocked laughter cut through the tension. Photographers were now openly snapping pictures. The scandal had become spectacle. Victoria turned to her mother, panic flickering in her eyes. "Mother, she's your partner?" Margaret nodded slowly, horror dawning. "Chen Therapeutics supplies 40% of our pharmaceutical imports. Without them—" She stopped, realizing too late how loud her voice had become. The crowd erupted in whispers. "She's the Chen Therapeutics founder? She's a billionaire. And he left her? God, look at those children, how could he deny them?" James's jaw clenched. Enough. But there was no silencing the crowd now. His image, the perfect man, the reformed bachelor, the self-made titan, was dissolving in front of hundreds of cameras and eyes that suddenly looked at him with judgment instead of envy. Victoria took a step back, her bouquet trembling. "You lied to me," she said, voice breaking. "You told me your first marriage ended because she cheated." Victoria, listen, it's not." She shook her head, her voice rising. "Not what? Not the truth? That you abandoned her when she was pregnant? That you didn't know you had 3 daughters?" Gasps. Someone recorded the entire exchange, the soft chime of a phone camera unmistakable. James's control finally cracked. "Stop this," he snapped. "All of you. This is manipulation." Rosemary's tone was cool, almost pitying. "Still calling women manipulative when they stand up to you, James? Some habits don't change." He turned to her then, eyes blazing, the facade gone. "What do you want from me, Rosemary? Money? Recognition? An apology?" She met his gaze calmly. "I don't need anything from you. I built my own name. My daughters have everything they need. You invited me to show off your success. I came to show you mine." Her words hung in the air like judgment carved in marble. Margaret Ashford, regaining her composure, straightened. "Dr. Chun, on behalf of my family, I had no idea. If we'd known." Rosemary cut her off gently. You'd have still held the wedding, Mrs. Ashford. But perhaps you'd have chosen a better son-in-law. The crowd laughed, softly, nervously, as though unsure whether they were allowed to. Victoria's face had gone ghostly pale. She turned on James, voice trembling but loud enough for all to hear. You told me you'd never been married. Victoria, please. You said you were waiting for the right woman. James reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. Don't touch me. Photographers caught the moment, his hand suspended in air, her recoil, the woman in red standing between them like fate itself. For a moment, the only sound was the ocean beyond the terrace. Then one of the guests, a well-known investor, cleared his throat. I think, he said quietly, I'll be withdrawing from the Arnold Group partnership. My firm doesn't invest in men who abandon their children. Another voice followed. Nor do we. James turned in disbelief. You can't be serious. This is personal. Character is never personal, the investor replied. The murmur of agreement swelled. Rosemary watched, not gloating, simply observing, as if she were studying the consequences of a chemical reaction she had predicted years ago. Elena, standing at the back of the crowd with tears in her eyes, whispered to herself, he doesn't even realize she's not doing this to him, she's freeing herself. Victoria's voice sliced through the noise. The wedding is off. The words landed like a gavel. The guests froze. Margaret's pearls clicked against each other as she turned away, humiliated. The string quartet lowered their instruments, unsure whether to play or flee. James stood there, alone amid the glittering wreckage of his own making. Rosemary inclined her head slightly, her voice soft but final. You always wanted to be the center of attention, James. Congratulations. You finally are. She turned to her daughters. Girls, say goodbye. The triplets, composed beyond their years, curtsied politely. Goodbye, Mr. Arnold. Then they turned, their small hands slipping into hers. The crowd parted instinctively as they walked down the marble steps toward the waiting limousine, crimson and black against the brilliance of the day. James didn't move. He couldn't. He watched the woman he'd once called worthless walk away, surrounded by grace, by life, by everything he'd thrown away, and knew with bone-deep certainty that he had lost not only her, but the version of himself that might have been redeemed. As the limo door closed, a breeze swept through the estate, rustling the orchids and scattering rose petals across the marble. Someone muttered, she didn't even raise her voice. Another replied, she didn't have to. And from the pavilion above, James Arnold stood alone, watching the car disappear down the long drive, his reflection broken once more in the glass doors, a man staring at the ruin of his illusion. Inside the limousine, Rosemary looked out the window, her daughter's laughter soft in the background. Justice, she thought, doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it arrives in silence, wrapped in red silk and poise. The moment Victoria's voice cracked through the air, the hush inside the pavilion shattered. You told me you'd never been married, she screamed, bouquet trembling in her grip. You said you wanted a woman of substance, someone who wasn't after your money. You abandoned your pregnant wife. Every word echoed through the marble hall, each syllable a dagger that found its mark. Guests gasped. Some turned away, others stared openly, their curiosity no longer masked by politeness. The press photographers, sensing history, began firing in bursts, the sharp click-click-click of exposure. James reached for her arm. Victoria, please, not here. Here is perfect, she spat, jerking away. Since you've humiliated me in front of half the city, it's only fair that I return the favor. The crowd rippled with uneasy murmurs. Margaret Ashford buried her face in her hands. Richard Ashford muttered to his wife, Margaret, get her under control. But Victoria wouldn't stop. She was beyond containment, beyond decorum. You let me stand up here like a fool, about to marry a man who left his pregnant wife to fend for herself? Who has 3 daughters he never even met? The reporters had their headline before the words even finished leaving her mouth. Victoria, please, James said again, quieter now, his composure crumbling. It's not how it sounds. Then explain it, she shouted. Explain the children who look exactly like you. Explain the woman who built an empire you could never touch. Gasps spread like wildfire. Her voice carried outside the pavilion, where staff, guests, and photographers on the terrace turned to listen. I thought you were a man of integrity, Victoria said, her voice shaking but loud. You told me she was a mistake, that she used you. My God, you used her. James's face went pale. Victoria. But she wasn't done. She turned to the guests, her eyes bright with tears and fury. Everyone here, do you know what kind of man this is? He preaches loyalty, values, family, all while abandoning his own. Whispers erupted. Is it true? She's Dr. Chen. You can't fake that. Arnold's finished. His company's built on reputation. The guests began drifting toward the exits, discreetly at first, then in visible groups. Some made calls, others murmured to assistants. James caught sight of his investors, men and women he'd courted for years, leaning together whispering. His credibility's gone. We can't back him now. The optics are poison. The empire he'd built on charm and illusion began to crumble in real time. Outside, the press had caught the scent of scandal like sharks to blood. Photographers surged forward. Journalists shouted over each other. Dr. Chen. Is it true you were married to Mr. Arnold? Are those his children? Dr. Chen, how do you respond to his accusations from years ago? Rosemary shielded her daughters gently with one arm, her voice calm and measured. This is neither the time nor the place, she said, every syllable precise. Her serenity only made them more frenzied. Cameras flashed, the light bouncing off her crimson gown like embers. James tried to reach her, his voice desperate. Rosemary, please can we talk? Just for a moment. She turned, her gaze steady. We've already had our moment, James. You ended it 7 years ago. He flinched. I didn't know. I didn't. You didn't want to know, she interrupted softly. You made sure of it. The words landed with the quiet finality of truth. Elena, standing near the back of the chaos, felt her phone buzz. She glanced at the screen, Chen Therapeutics HQ. She answered in a low whisper. Dr. Chen's assistant, she said. A voice on the other end was breathless. Elena, put her on now. You need to tell her this. Elena looked up, eyes wide. Rosemary, she called, threading her way through the crowd. Rosemary turned slightly as Elena reached her side. It's Marcus from the board, Elena said, barely containing her excitement. Your stock price just spiked 18%. The moment your identity went public, the market responded instantly. Rosemary blinked, surprised despite herself. 18. They're calling it the Chen effect. Investors are saying you're the most visionary CEO since anyone. The world just found out the face behind the empire. For the first time that afternoon, a true smile curved Rosemary's lips. Good, she said quietly. Let them know exactly who they underestimated. Elena grinned, eyes shining. Already done. Back inside, the wedding was officially disintegrating. Victoria had thrown her bouquet across the aisle. The guests were leaving in a stream of murmured apologies and thinly veiled fascination. The quartet packed up their instruments. Margaret Ashford stood stiff as stone, her gaze fixed on James. You've humiliated my family, she said through clenched teeth. You've cost us partnerships, prestige, everything. Margaret, I can fix this. You can't fix ruin, she snapped. Victoria whirled toward him, eyes blazing. You told me she was nothing, James. That she was beneath you. But she's everything you'll never be. Her voice trembled, but her words were lethal. You don't love anyone. You just love control. James reached for her one last time. Victoria, please, let's talk in private. She recoiled, the disgust in her voice clear. You disgust me. Then, turning toward the stunned audience, she declared, the wedding is off. The words rang out like a verdict. James's carefully polished life, his empire, his reputation, his facade, cracked visibly as Rosemary turned to leave. Rosemary, he said again, his voice raw now. Please. I need to explain. I made mistakes. I didn't know you'd. She faced him fully. Didn't know I'd what? Survive. He looked lost, desperate. I thought you were gone. You disappeared. Her eyes softened slightly, but her tone stayed cool. You told me to disappear. You threw me out and made sure I couldn't reach you. But I didn't vanish, James. I evolved. He swallowed hard. I didn't mean for it to end like that. Yes, she said quietly. You did. And that's the difference between us. You destroyed what you didn't value. I rebuilt what I refused to lose. She stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. There's nothing left to discuss. I built everything you thought I couldn't. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the hum of voices and cameras fading around them, the entire estate holding its breath. Then she turned, gathering her daughters close. Come girls, she said gently. We've paid our respects. The triplets each took one of her hands. They walked down the marble steps through a corridor of stairs, whispers, and flashing cameras. Some guests nodded respectfully. Others moved aside, murmuring words like incredible, unreal legend. The limousine waited at the end of the drive, gleaming like a promise. As Rosemary approached, Cinderella glanced up at her. Mama, she whispered, was that really Daddy? Rosemary squeezed her hand gently. That was a man who didn't know what he had. Clara looked thoughtful. Will we see him again? Rosemary smiled faintly. Only in mirrors, my loves. They climbed into the car, the doors closing with a soft, definitive click. Behind them, the sounds of chaos still echoed faintly. Arguments, camera flashes, the unraveling of a man who had believed himself untouchable. Inside the limousine, silence reigned, peaceful, unhurried, powerful. Rosemary gazed out at the sea through the tinted glass. The sunlight turned the waves gold. Elena sat opposite her, still reeling. You just ended a wedding, a reputation, and a dynasty in one afternoon. Rosemary looked down at her daughters, who had already begun to drift into sleep. They said we were nothing, she murmured. I'll show them what nothing can become. The car rolled forward smooth and silent, as behind them, James Arnold's world finally collapsed, not with an explosion, but with a whisper of truth he could never take back. Elena approached quietly. It's all over the news, she said, holding up her phone. They're calling it the Chen vindication. Every outlet. Every network. Rosemary smiled faintly. Let them talk. James Arnold's company stock plummeted 12% in an hour, Elena added. His board just issued a statement cutting ties with him. Rosemary didn't gloat. She simply nodded. Then balance has been restored. She turned her gaze back to her daughters, three small symbols of everything she'd fought for, laughing beneath the chandelier light. They'll never know hunger, she said quietly. Or shame. Or the fear of being powerless. Elena followed her gaze, eyes soft. They'll know strength, Rosemary. Because they've seen it. As the gala drew to a close, Rosemary gathered her daughters near the entrance. Outside, the limousine waited again, headlights glowing against the night. She knelt down to their level, smoothing their hair, straightening their sashes. Girls, she said softly, today wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. About what it means to stand tall when the world tries to break you. Mara nodded solemnly. We understand, Mama. Clara smiled. You showed everyone. Cinderella yawned and leaned against her shoulder. Can we go home now? Rosemary kissed the top of her head. Soon. But first we ride. They stepped into the limousine. The driver closed the door. The city lights reflected off the glass, thousands of shimmering points of light, like stars scattered across a velvet sky. Rosemary looked at her daughters, their faces glowing softly in the golden interior light. We don't go back, she said quietly. We rise. The triplets smiled, their voices a sleepy chorus. We rise. The limousine pulled away from the curb, merging into the stream of city lights. Back at Ocean View, night had fallen. The estate was nearly empty now, only the hum of the sea and the faint rustle of flowers left behind. James Arnold stood alone at the altar, his tuxedo stained with salt and regret. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, reflecting the moon in fractured silver shards. In the distance, the faint glimmer of headlights faded into the horizon, the last trace of the woman he'd once cast aside. He closed his eyes, but even in darkness he could still see her, crimson and gold, walking away with grace he could never comprehend. And for the first time, he understood that power, real power, isn't taken. It's earned. It's lived. It's forgiven. He opened his eyes to the sound of waves, constant, unrelenting, eternal. In the limousine, Rosemary leaned her head back, watching the ocean through the window's reflection, the waves chasing the stars. The road curved along the water, endless and open. Her daughter slept against her sides, their breaths soft and even. For the first time in 7 years, she felt completely at peace. The car glided onward, carrying them into the future, not bound by the past, but elevated above it. Outside, the reflection of the ocean shimmered across the glass, symbol of renewal, serenity, and the unstoppable rise of a woman who had once been called nothing. 1 week later. The world had moved on, but not quietly. Every major news outlet carried her name in headlines that glowed across screens and city billboards. Dr. Rosemary Chen, the woman who rose from betrayal to billions. Success is the best response to cruelty, a new era of feminine power. The Chen effect, how one woman's grace changed a culture. Stock analysts called it the fastest image shift in modern business history. Chen Therapeutics' valuation soared by 40% in 5 days. Social media hailed her as a symbol of resilience, a living rebuke to every man who had ever underestimated the woman beside him. Even schoolgirls in distant countries began quoting her now immortal line. It became a mantra printed on notebooks, posters, and coffee mugs. We don't go back. We rise. In his corner office high above the city, James Arnold watched the coverage in silence. The same media that had once crowned him Man of the Year now called him a study in hubris. His phone rang constantly, reporters, lawyers, shareholders, but he ignored them all. On the desk lay an old photograph, one he had found buried in a drawer, Rosemary, smiling faintly in the early days of their marriage, before the wealth, before the pride. He traced her image with one shaking hand. It wasn't love he felt now, not anymore, but recognition. She had been the mirror he'd refused to face. And she had walked away with everything that mattered. Meanwhile, at the Chen Global Science Foundation, a new banner hung above the marble entrance. Empowering Mothers. Advancing Science. Inside, the annual gala was in full swing. Guests from around the world filled the ballroom. Scientists, engineers, scholars, artists. No paparazzi this time. Only people who understood what it meant to build quietly, to endure, to rise. Rosemary stood on the stage beneath the warm glow of chandeliers, her crimson gown replaced by an ivory one, simple, elegant, luminous. Her daughter sat in the front row, restless but proud, dressed in matching blue. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm power that had silenced the world days before. 7 years ago, she began, I lost everything that could be taken from me. But in that loss, I discovered what could never be taken: intellect, dignity, and love. She paused, her gaze finding her daughter's. The world will try to measure you by what you've lost or by who left you behind. Don't let it. Measure yourself by what you build after. The crowd rose in applause, genuine, sustained, thunderous. Her daughters beamed. Clara whispered to Mara, she's famous now. Mara whispered back, she was always famous. People just didn't know. Weeks passed. The scandal faded from gossip columns, replaced by the rise of the Chen Initiative, a program funding education and startups for single mothers in STEM fields. Rosemary's name became shorthand for reinvention. Universities invited her to speak. Governments sought her advice. Through it all, she kept her focus where it had always been, forward. At home, she was still just Mama. She cooked breakfast, braided hair, checked homework. Sometimes, when the triplets played the piano together, she'd close her eyes and think of the storm 7 years ago, and how it had all led here. Each note, each laugh, was a promise fulfilled. One morning, long after the noise had settled, Rosemary sat on her balcony overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in soft sunlight, the world moving to her rhythm now. Elena arrived with coffee and the latest news brief. They want to name the scholarship after you, she said, handing her the paper. Rosemary smiled. They can name it after the girls. Elena blinked. All three. All three, Rosemary said. They're the legacy. Below, the hum of the city drifted upward, traffic, laughter, possibility. For the first time in years, Rosemary allowed herself a moment of stillness. The past no longer had claws. The future no longer frightened her. She was free. Later that afternoon, she took her daughters to the coast, the same stretch of sea where her reckoning had taken place. The girls ran along the sand, their laughter carried on the wind. Rosemary stood at the edge of the water, the tide washing over her feet, the same ocean that had once witnessed her humiliation now reflecting her triumph. Mara called out, "Mama, come play." She smiled. "In a moment, my love." Her gaze lingered on the horizon, endless, forgiving, bright. She whispered to the wind, half to herself, half to the ghosts she no longer feared. "Thank you for breaking me. It was the only way I could rebuild." The sea answered with a shimmer of light. That night, the city lights glowed like constellations. From the back seat of their limousine, Rosemary and her daughters watched the skyline blur past, towers of glass and steel reflecting the stars above. Cinderella yawned, curling up beside her. "Are we going home, Mama?" she asked sleepily. Rosemary brushed a curl from her forehead. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "We're moving forward." She looked out the window once more, the ocean's reflection gliding across the glass, calm, infinite, full of light. It was no longer a symbol of loss. It was rebirth. Rosemary smiled, her voice a whisper as the city melted into gold and silver. "We don't go back," she said again, almost to herself. "We rise." The limousine moved through the night, carrying four silhouettes framed in starlight, a mother and her daughters, heading not away from the past, but toward everything the future promised. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about this story in the comments section.